Hey everyone, this is my case study for class AEP 853. Get this kid out of my classroom. Had an opportunity to read through the case study and come up with a summary that I thought was a baseline for what I knew about the system, about the teachers, and of course about our student. Obviously we are dealing with an escalating situation where our student has gone from self-infliction to aggressive towards others. What I understood from the case study was that not only am I dealing with a student who was previously on an IEP, but I'm also dealing with two new staff members within the district. And the district seems to be one, widespread, and two, limited on resources, honestly. Which I thought would actually hinder our communication process. So in summary, I come up with a young boy, a third grade boy, who is big, self-abusive turned outward aggression. His parents are recently divorced. He has two older siblings who also have emotional issues. Within that home, there's joint custody, primarily with mom, but now mom is working 50 plus hours outside of the home. I know police presence has been involved, and that seems to have caused a volatile situation in this young kiddo's life. Like I said, he does have an IEP. He was on a past behavior consequence reward system, but obviously we're needing to look at a new plan. Part of that summary I would also say is that we need to understand that Schuyler K-12 building is a rural district, a district that actually contains 16 other schools. They use a co-op for all their resources, which do include a shared superintendent, shared supervision, things like that. As I mentioned before, we have two new teachers who are dealing with our special education program, and the one, Susan, is coming in and replacing a veteran teacher, as they said in the case study, an institution for Fulton School District. So there's some preconceived notions, there's preconceived expectations on how the staff or the faculty should be dealing with this situation. So as I went through and I identified the problem, I identified that our new teacher is dealing with an aggressive student who has in the past been self-abusive, now turned outwardly aggressive towards her at this stage. The consequence reward behavior system does not seem to be working at this current moment, and her position is to get him out of her room. We do know that part of this problem is his parents are recently divorced. And there is some angst and anxiety that goes along with that. I do know that I can identify part of the problem is that his IEP plan is not currently working, so we need a new plan to intervene but not interfere with Carl's success in and out of the classroom. I do understand at this point what the district's situation for support is. I understand Carl's current IEP, as well as the teacher's emotional position to get him out. I'd like to know actually what last year's behavior chart looked like and how that was charted. I'd like to see what other documentation is available on him, since really we're only 6 weeks into school. I'd like to see through that documentation if there's actually a trend or a time of day or something that triggers these responses for him. Maybe it's even a bit of a relationship piece between him and Nancy. I'd like to know what other resources are available to her. I'd like to see our current plan written out. And the other piece that I would like to know is his time with his parents. How is he spending things? How is he spending his time in between his parents? So those are some things that I'd still like to know, or at least have some information on as we move forward into our plan of action. So here's what I see. First, I want to obtain signed paperwork from parents, getting consent that we need to make these changes to help Carl be more successful. Second, I would do a follow-up with Nancy, Carl's teacher, special education teacher, about that new plan in place. Because as she left in the case study, she was very frustrated or upset that this was the new method in which we were going to move forward in the plan, when Mr. Lewis, last year's special education teacher, would have taken a different position or a different stance. So I need to do some follow-up with Nancy to communicate that situation with her, as well as communicate the situation with the superintendent to keep that person in the loop. Fourth, I'd make documentation charts for Nancy so we could gather data to find that constant or to find that trigger, as well as to mark in the positive interactions we are having with Carl. Fifth, I'd involve that shared psychologist, asking them to come in and help Carl find an appropriate way, appropriate technique to deal with his outbursts. But in the meantime, understand that removal from the classroom may be needed for him to be successful. Again, I would continue that communication piece with other teachers involved in Carl's academic performance, making them aware of the plan, as well as maybe using some of those teachers as tools, as relationship builders, to help him find somebody that he can connect with. The next thing I would do on my list and my plan of action is to find resources for Nancy. She really is a new teacher, and right out of college really could use that support to help understand students who have this social emotional need, to help them through those outbursts. So I would look for resources. I'd also find a safe place, an adult, to help Carl break through some of that anxiety before it even escalates to that situation. Whether that's a safe spot in the classroom to just go and sit, whether it's a break time that's built into his day or several times throughout his day. Maybe it's asking him to run errands, just to kind of switch his mind from escalation mode to de-escalation and be preventative of some of these situations. I'd then be part of my plan, my action plan, to chart this. Every 30 minutes or so, have Nancy fill in that chart to let us know when Carl feels the most anxious, when he's ready to make that outburst, and maybe we can find some sort of connection between his outbursts and the time of day or what's going on in his little life. So what's best for our students here, the resolution would be to find a common ground for that teacher and that student, because right now that relationship is not a relationship of trust. So I'd like to find some common ground there, and I'd like to help build that relationship. I'd look for resources, like I said, for Nancy, but I'd also look for those resources for Carl, the school psychologist, maybe finding a 5-point behavior chart so he can use verbals or nonverbals to explain where he's at or how he's feeling. I'd look for classroom participation. I'd find tools for behavior management so Carl can self-regulate himself or verbalize before we get to explosion mode. I'd make sure that we are following the plan, because that's what's best for Carl. If we're consistent on that plan, then we'll have an opportunity to help him find success. I would again focus in on communication between everybody involved in this process, parent to parent, parent to staff, staff to staff, all of those pieces where we could offer what's best for Carl through all of the people who have a vested interest in him being successful. And of course, what's best for my kiddo? Positive reinforcement. I would make sure that in every instance or every opportunity we can to reinforce him that this is positive behavior, this is what we're looking for, and this will get you the attention that you're seeking. So as I go through and I really think about where we are as would be as a staff or a district, or at least the teachers in this situation, I would be a little concerned, and I am a little concerned that our new special education teacher was coming out of college a little unprepared for a behavioral situation like this. I'm concerned that the district is so large that sharing staff, as well as just even getting to the building, takes 30 minutes to an hour drive to get there, seems a bit extreme. Our kiddos nowadays are suffering all kinds of situations and going through situations that have them socially, emotionally unprepared to deal with the stresses at school. So they need to find those outlets. Some of the other things that I felt were a little bit of sadness For the kids who are dealing with adult issues, obviously the parents are very upset and angry, and probably make comments at home if they're going to make them in front of staff members. I was afraid that Susan, as a new teacher, was filling shoes of a highly praised and appreciated staff member. That is a hard place to be in, with those expectations that other people have on what that position, her position, should be. Those things had me thinking, wow, she has a lot to kind of to face. I did appreciate her efforts in following the law, making changes for Carl appropriately, even though it wasn't at the speed that Teacher Nancy would want them to be at. I did appreciate the urgency of the situation, but Susan being diligent and not moving forward without parental consent was huge for me. Some issues I feel like we still have to look into is whether or not we have funding and training for these new staff members coming in to deal with kids like Carl. Whether or not the parents really have bought into the system, or if they're just, placing blame on each other. So an unresolved issue for me was the fact that we can't control that situation for the student or the parents. Safety for the student was an issue for me. Relationships, the distance from school, as I mentioned before, because maybe they're driving in the morning, and that's a rough transition for Carl to make. I don't quite know, but it's an unresolved issue. Within that, I think his siblings dealing with the things that they're dealing with and him then watching that behavior is an unresolved issue. Mom mentioning that they're going to share meds or could share meds is an unresolved issue. That anger, maybe even needing a psychologist evaluation, a psychological evaluation, could be something that could benefit Carl in the long run. So there's some things in there that I felt like were unresolved, some things that I thought as an administrator, maybe my hands would be tied and I couldn't really quite address, but I really felt like it was something that we should consider or at least be aware of as we move forward with Carl's new plan. So here's where I'm at with things to make sure that we are moving forward for what's best in the well-being of the student and the academic success of the student would be to communicate with everybody involved. It's of utmost importance that Carl's needs to express his feelings happen in a safe and secure environment, a least restrictive environment. I would have him work on building relationship with his teacher, Miss Nancy, following that plan of removal for outbursts, to be able to seek help, to regulate himself on a 5-point scale. As an administrator, I would follow the law and develop a thought-out plan of action for Carl, and I would use the documentation methods to chart his behavior, because all of those things are key into what's best for him, which may be individualized curriculum, social emotional supports, maybe even peer assistance, something that the other kids can model or he could be partnered up with and get him some assistance there. As I mentioned before, least restrictive environment is what we would be looking for overall for Carl and his academic success. To support his well-being, I would find a supportive environment, an effective and consistent plan, hopefully using a team or collaborative approach where all of us could work together to aid Carl in his social emotional needs. Frequent communication, I think, would help with our well-being. Plan time to address those social needs. 5-point chart and breaks. Breaks sometimes within the day can help our students refocus and get back on task. So when it comes down to instruction, I'd use collaborative methods. I would use that IEP and resources, hopefully found resources for both Nancy and for Carl. Use an individualized instruction, offer support, and then provide a detailed plan for something that would engage Carl in a way that makes him feel successful in the classroom, loved in the classroom, and needed. So as I kind of summarize the case study as I see it, as well as some things that I want to consider for future, being a future leader, I would say that Carl needs instructional methods that offer engagement, as well as function for him to successfully begin to manage his emotional state. While it may be easy to assume the divorce is a primary source for Carl's aggressive behavior, we do need to consider other factors, such as curriculum rigor, classroom management, behaviors repeating, and others, things that we need to be aware of as his teachers and his administrative leaders. Thanks for listening.